Alright, in this video presentation, what we're going to do is look at how to check if a file exists. So we get a couple of phases that we're going to go through, a couple of examples. So in the first one, we're going to take a look at the phase 1, and in the variable section, what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable name called f1, where we're going to append a value of info.txt. We're going to create a function named fileExists, and the function's purpose then is to check to see if the file exists. If it doesn't, then it will display, if it does, it will display fileExists. If it doesn't, no file found. And then we're going to utilize the f1 variable to check to see if the file exists, and then you're going to have a little question to answer here. So that's phase 1. So let's go ahead and start taking a look of what we need to do in phase 1. Also, since we're doing something unique with this one, we need to also import a OS module that provides a way to interact with the operating system. So this particular configuration is going to provide us a feature function to look at the file and directory operations that we're working with, and you'll see in a moment why that's going to be important. So let's go ahead and start looking at the code here, and don't need that comment there. So first things first, what we're going to do then is we're going to create our variable, and we said that our variable is going to be of info.txt. And a little bit about the starter code, just like I've been doing before in our lab. I just have a main and then my message. So this gets basically placed in this particular function, which will display the header information about the program. And in phase 1 here, we're going to create the function if the file exists. So first thing we need to do then is to create our definition of file exists. And we're stating that if the file exists, display the file exists. If not, no file found. And we're going to basically pass a parameter here. If OS path file exists for f1, print file exists, else print file not found. And then we're going to come down over here for our input statement, and what we're going to do here is we're going to make a call to if file exists. Let's go ahead and run the code and see what happens. All right, we get an error clearly, so line 49. So if we take a look at line 49 here, so we have an issue with this, and it's saying that the error OS is not defined. This is why I made a point that we are going to do something slightly a little different. We need to include an OS module. So coming up here to the OS, to the library area, what we're going to do then is specify that we want to import a module called OS, and that is going to be the function that's going to work with this to check to see if the file does exist. So let's go back here and then run the code again. So you can see then when the file went through, all right, so we ran the program, we got our header information, and coming down to our main program, this outputs the header. If file exists, comes up over here, starts this function. If OS path exists for F1, and this is basically coming up here and looking at file.info, and basically it's saying that the file is not found because there is no file.info that exists at this particular point. So the program works as is needed. So let me clear the screen here, going back and look at phase 2. All right, phase 2, we're going to update the F1 variable with a new string named dogs. So we're going to come up over here, we're going to change this to dogs.txt, and then we're going to come back and run the code. And as you can see, that particular file does exist in our specific directory. Now let's take a look at phase 3. Phase 3, we're looking to update the code to prompt the user for a file name this time. Then utilize the input to check to see if the file exists. Run the code twice for the test data. We'll type in cats and then resume.txt. And then we'll take a look at the questions pertaining to that. So when we're looking at the code, as soon as we basically open up the file, we could do this actually in a couple of different ways. So when we have basically the file, if file exists, what we'll do is we'll prompt the user for a file name. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to take the user file information. Since F1 was a static entry, user file, we're just going to paste that there, and instead it's going to utilize the input that the user had provided. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the code is going to look like and what happens. So let me clear the screen here and let's run the code. File name, and here we wanted to, in phase 3, utilize cats and resume.txt. So do cats.txt, no file found. Run the program again and do resume.txt, and you can see that that particular file does exist. So that was simple enough. Now you're wondering, like, well, how do we know the file exists? Well, behind all this code, I do have a set of files in directories, in the specific directory that identifies those files that I've created, so those files are actually there. And then our last phase, what we're going to do is we're going to update the code and create a separate function to prompt the user for a name. So instead of being this as part of one function, what we're going to do in phase 3, we're going to, in phase 4, what we're going to is create a separate function. So I commented out this particular line. We're going to start out with getUserInput. We're going to prompt the user to enter a file name. And then what we need to do is, since the user file that we have here, if you remember that functions variables that are created are going to be local to the function, I am also going to return this back, the output, return it back to the call statement. So now instead of utilizing fileExists, I'm going to utilize, we need to utilize getUserInput. So we're going to take this and prompt the user for input, and then fileExists will continue on with this. So we're going to pass the parameter. Now this in itself, when we run it, it's not going to run very well. So let's take a look at what the output is going to be. So let me clear the screen, run this. So it's prompt me for a file name. We'll do cats.txt, and we're going to get an error. And the reason why we're getting an error is the syntax here is not written correctly. So let me get rid of some additional spaces here. Because what's happening is it's going to utilize this particular function, prompt the user, return the value, fileExists, we come up with the fileExists, and there's no parameter that's being passed to fileExists here. So to solve this problem, what we need to do then is make a modification to the syntax here, and it needs to do something along the lines like this. getUserInput, so it comes up here, user enters the file name, the system is going to return back the user file, and what we're going to do then is when it returns it, it's going to save it to the file name. And then we need to take this and put it there. So again, what's happening with this is this getUserInput is coming up here, prompting the user, and it's going to return the value that's been entered. And this value then is being saved as a file name to a new variable. We're going to take this and we're going to pass it to fileExists. So now when it comes down to fileExists, we're passing this parameter here. Now there's one more thing that we need to do then, is we need to basically specify what is being passed and create a local variable for this now. And the way we're going to do this, we could name anything that we want. We could basically, I'm just going to utilize x and substitute this with x. Let me clear the code. And let's go ahead and run it now. File name cats.txt. You see that didn't work. Or we got file not found. And if we do dogs.txt, that particular file exists. So again, this method seems a little complicated, but it's not. We're utilizing and breaking things down into multiple functions. So each function does a specific purpose. So once again, if you don't understand how the functions work, rewatch this segment again to make sure you understand how these particular functions work. Again, if you don't know or have a hard time understanding this, let me know the specifics of it and I'll create another explainer video on that particular part. So that is it with this particular program.